Hello, my friends. Welcome back. Okay, I'm going to talk about politics today a little bit of a recap, and I tell you why. Because I am a retired teacher, yes, but they called me a few days ago, an old college of mine, saying, would I please take this student? They had a little bit of an emergency and to teach online, and an international student. It's in another part of the world, in the Middle East, as a matter of fact, and that she needs to prepare for the A-level sociology and so on. Could I please take it on? It's only an hour a day, blah blah blah. I said yes. All right. So I've been retired now for a while, so I had to go back to my old textbooks and start at the beginning, because the student is a complete beginner on this, and I went through the experience of having to go back to the very beginning of things, to explain things from the point of view, so that the person who's listening to me, who hasn't heard anything about it, she doesn't know who Karl Marx is, never heard of him, okay, a young, 18-year-old in a different part of the world. So to go back to that level, and it's quite a challenge. I enjoy it very much to take everything all that you take for granted out of your head and start explaining things from the very beginning. And you need to do a sort of and anyway, so I enjoyed it, and I started, and then I thought, okay, then I was listening to what's happening in the world in politics, and I thought I would like to do a recap, to go back to the very beginning and put it all together, all the way from, because we are almost there in a global conflict. I'm going to choose my words, because you know that at this moment, because of the US elections, they are the media bosses are very touchy about just, single words and things. So they don't promote the video if the algorithm tells them not to. So, but anyway, I'm not going to say anything exceptional. I'm not even going to say anything that you don't know. But I want to sort of do this exercise and go back to the very beginning and see if we can see it all in context. And the reason is, I said that I think we find ourselves in a situation of emergency. And an emergency that is might lead us very well into a global conflict. And regardless where you are politically, which side you take on, this or that, against this, against that, it doesn't matter, because we're almost there. Yeah, regardless of which position you take, where your starting point is, from which angle you're looking at the situation, either conflict in Europe or in the Middle East. This is, I believe that this is a critical moment in the history of the world. It's not the only one, but it is a critical moment now. And it is a critical moment now, especially between now and there is a clock with two alarms. One is set for the US election, November 5th and January 20th. And the other one is when definitely Russia, when the war is finished. Okay? All right, let's leave it like that. So it's a critical moment. Let's look at the transition. What has been happening here? first of all, in the geopolitical, three ways: the geopolitical, the socio-economic, and the cultural values. I'm not going to talk about culture and values. That's another video. I'm not even going to talk about economics. I studied economics, but I never understood it. But I'm going to concentrate more on the geopolitical aspect of it. And the critical thing is that we are changing, as you know, from this is happening right now, okay? It has perhaps already happened, except that one side has not accepted it yet. This movement from the unipolar world to the multipolar world, okay? One hegemon, one dominant power, and many, or at least three, or at least two, okay? So, this is occasioning a radical change in thinking, as we can see. In the socio-economic arena, they have realized I'm going to talk about the global financial corporate elite kind of thing. They have recognized for a long time now that the current economic model is exhausted. Okay, for the last 40 years, but certainly in the last 20. This is what we call neoliberalism, neoliberal economics, okay? Up to recently, there were critics saying that this was not working anymore. We were entering into a post-capitalist world, a post-corporate capitalism, all kinds of things. But now I think even the great corporate powers acknowledge that this is so. The system is exhausted. There is no dynamism, there is no investment, and so on. So we're going to need a new model of organizing societies economically. You've heard the last president, the former president of Italy, Draghi, with his report to the European Union, okay, saying that the present system is not functioning, and it hasn't been functioning for a while. So we need another model. So this is another transition from unipolar to multipolar, from this capitalist system that we've been having for the last 200 years to a new something else, however different or however similar. And then, of course, in the cultural values area, okay, which is kind of parallel, too much extremism. So should we go back to more traditional values? Yes, a lot of people want to, but how? And so on. Okay, so that is another transition. So this is the pivotal moment when everything is right there through three major transitions. And here we are looking at the three of them together. And what is happening is that this elite is feeling threatened. The ones that have held power, certainly since the Second World War, but let's say since the 90s, okay, that pivotal moment when we call it the collapse of the Soviet Union, okay, they feel threatened because they had, from the 1990s, they had absolute complete control over how the world was governed. So this is the first time that they feel really threatened. And if we want to understand, we have to go back a little bit. Okay, I know you all know this, but nevertheless, just to put it all in context. Okay, certainly to the end of the Cold War and the 90s. Okay, this is the starting point. I'm sorry, there is someone calling me here. I'm sorry, things happened. Okay, so the starting point in the 90s, you remember that you will hear many times mentioning this book by Francis Fukuyama, yes, The End of History and The Last Man. Before he wrote that, he had written an article before that, and it sort of produced some furor all over the place in the United States, and so he decided to write an article. But basically, you know by now that this is the end of the Cold War. Socialism is over everywhere. Well, perhaps Cuba or something, but I mean, who cares? But it is obvious that any other system didn't work. The only thing that works is liberal democracy. Liberal democracy now has no opposition, and most importantly, the big financial corporations now deregularize, yes, so that instead of multinationals or national or multinational, they could become transnational above nation states, okay? The most important thing there is that now they have no adversaries. So they felt we can do pretty much what we want in geopolitics, in economics, in the cultural sphere, whatever it is, okay? So the Soviet Union falls, and these corporate interests really feel that they own the world, okay? They have total control of the West, these corporations. They now have, or they're beginning to have, total control of the media. Remember that there were hundreds and hundreds of radio stations and tens of different television stations, all now belong in the United States to six, not only in the United States, in the West, 6 major media corporations, in the hands of 6 corporations, all of it, okay? So they control the media now. Through the media, they obviously control public opinion, and so they control ideology and how public opinion views the world. In practice, in the political sphere, it is at this moment that the right and the left disappear in political parties. People continue to say the right and the left. It doesn't exist. Not as it was before. Okay, from this moment, both parties operate within a framework that works for and is managed by these corporate interests. Okay, you have to be in this framework, okay, if we are going to allow you to operate at all, okay, political party leaders or whatever. So they have a very small space here, okay, so they will argue with each other, and the more they're similar, the more they'll fight openly to appear to disagree and be different, but really they are sort of more or less in a straitjacket. They're able to move a little bit, but there is the old-fashioned left and the old-fashioned right disappeared, okay. You have one major ideology that actually with which everyone agrees, and against which you go against it at your peril, because as a leader you will disappear. I mean, you will not be allowed to prosper in your political career if you go very much against it. And in this context, we have the Wolovich Doctrine. This man wrote a very important document in America saying that our strategy from now on has to be to subdue Russia. Russia has to be subdued. Look, the Soviet Union was defeated. We can behave as owners of the world. Let's put it that way, okay? The US is the only superpower. No one can confront us in any way, okay? And we are determined that the 21st century will be another American century. That is the doctrine. So they will talk about unilateralism. In other words, we decide what's to happen in the world. More, we really don't need to share anything with anybody else. In other words, we don't need to ask permission of governments. We don't need to wait until Japan, Korea, whoever agrees with us. That is not necessary. We are the ones who decide what is going to happen. That's number one. Number two is something called preventive intervention. And preventing intervention, by this we mean that we have the right to intervene in one country that is, if we perceive it, that is sliding away from our control. The moment we see that they are not following what is in our interest, okay, we are going to intervene there before they can create any problems. Of course, if you think about it, this would go against breaking, international law, international rules. That was not important. If we see danger there, beginning, we intervene, okay, and we stop it. But that was clear. But they admitted to themselves, look, there is a little bit of a problem that we haven't sorted out yet. And in other words, we're not there yet, not everything's accomplished. Wolovich put into question the degree of control they had over Russia. So they exercised this, they started working, obviously, they brought in Boris Yeltsin, they financed his campaign and so on and so forth, you know the story. So they had control of the political situation in Russia up to a point. Also, financially, they had the oligarchs. You remember that when the Soviet Union sort of dissolved, there were a few individuals who bought whole companies, which were state companies, and they would buy it for a dime kind of thing, and then they became multi-billionaires and so on. Okay, and these oligarchs were working together with the Western corporation interests. But so that was okay. Me, corporate, we had control over that situation, but we didn't know exactly how much control we had over the public opinion, the Russian people, intermediate sort of politicians. You know, we had Yeltsin, yes, but it was not too sure what to do, okay? It's important to take this into account for what is to follow. And anyway, at the end of the 1990s, they are beginning to see a little bit of a threat to this total dominance of the world. A report would be written titled The New American Century. This is following the wolovich doctrine, but more insisting on it, saying that the 21st century, we had to ensure that the 21st century was the new American century, and so. When they say new American century, you understand that they're not talking about the American people. It is not that we are going to make sure that the United States is the greatest country in the world, the United States. No, it's not that exactly. It's that we are going to use the United States government, the means that the United States has, for our corporate interests. Okay, what happens to the American people? poor darlings, I mean, it's as bad as anybody else's or worse, because they're actually paying their taxes and they're not getting anything for it. Everything goes towards the geopolitics of these other corporate elites. Okay, so we have to take into account that the American people are not necessarily benefiting themselves as a country. But okay, so what they see is they are going to channel their interests through the institutions of the United States of America's government. Okay, so they see that they're beginning to see a little bit of a threat there to that control. And this new American century now is going to mention Russia as a potential threat, and now they're going to add China. That is new, China, okay? As also emerging powers. There's a sort of an increasing of power in these other places that we don't 100% control. That's one. Threats to their control. Russia and China. Second, again, the exhaustion of the economic model. Because up to that time, you see, it was working. It was working, but we were cheating a little bit as to how well it was working, because a lot of it was through debt and things like that. They could see some problems, but anyway, it's debt may solve the problem in the short term, but in the long term, it actually just perhaps deepens it. Okay. And the third threat was that, so the first threat is Russia and China continue to be a threat. The second is that this economic model is not working really. We don't know how far this will go. We can stretch this with all these doubts there. And the second one, at the beginning of this century, was the internet. We forget how new it was, but although it was, the influence was not so great at first, but they saw, obviously, that its influence would increase, and they saw that as a potential loss of control over the general public, over the media, over how culture and information is transmitted to the general public. So that concentration of power as to the media, they saw that they could very well start losing that. Okay, so now they are, hold on, let me get a glass of water. Yes, so even in the early years, they saw the internet, that some people might escape our influence. So these are all threats. So they feel this is something that we're losing control over. So what can we do? We have to regain control. So what is it that we can do in order to prevent all this? Well, in regards to Russia and China, obviously not attack them directly because they are nuclear power, so we are not going to do that. But what we can do is to destabilize the countries. Certainly we can start by destabilizing the independent Muslim countries in the Middle East, and then go for Russia and China. Why this the interest in the Muslim countries and then Russia and China? You know that both countries have a very large Muslim minorities in those countries. If they destabilize them, you create problems for those countries. You remember a few years ago we heard so much about in China. I'm going to mispronounce the word now, so I'm not going to say it, but there are a group of a certain area where there are a lot of Muslims there, and you remember that they were, oh my God, kept in don't want to say in camps and all that sort of thing. We heard that periodically for a long time. I don't know what happened to that strategy, but that has been left on the back burner, as it were. But certainly in Russia, we have many countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union. Chechnya. How do you say it? Chechnya, I think. Okay, and certainly they started destabilizing that region. Okay, and the Chechenyans actually fell for it, and there was a war between that country that used to belong to the Soviet Union and Russia. But something happened, and that is in the war, something happened. The leader suddenly, I don't know how suddenly, but came to realize that he was actually being used. He came to that conclusion. Okay, so we were here minding our own business, and Russia was there doing what it could do. I mean, the whole economy in tatters and so on. So all of a sudden, we are the most terrible enemies. What is going on? Anyway, he figured it out, and the war stopped. And his son is the leader now of the Chechnya forces. You know, that guy, just looking at him, you want to run away. He's so scary. I remember about 2 years ago, when the war was starting, that he sent, you saw him in a YouTube video talking to, I think it was the Polish Prime Minister, Duda, right? And my goodness, I mean, he was he was scary. He was saying, Duda, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know who you're playing against. I mean, just like that. It was with the face of a boxer. Anyway, so this guy's totally pro-Russian. The Chechenian forces go there to help wherever they want, I suppose. So this was a strategy to destabilize. But in other words, if they destabilize Muslim countries, they could then use these Muslim minorities to destabilize Russia and China too. So as far as the Muslim countries were concerned, they started Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya. Yeah, okay. At first, with some success from their point of view. But it came to a practically complete stop, and it was to fail because Russia and China decided to confront this strategy in the Middle East. And they hadn't done so until then. They couldn't afford it. They didn't have the means. Okay, but they dare not, let's say. But now they intervene with Russia, especially in Syria, and put a stop to it. Put a stop to that strategy. And so now it is clear that Russia is not only a threat, but it could also be a menace. So Russia is the one to beat, yeah? So they really begin to feel threatened. So now we have Russia and China and emerging countries getting together. After Russia intervened there in Syria, other countries said, "Oh, okay, so Russia can do it, so perhaps we should see Russia as a model or as a leader or something like that." They saw that someone had actually confronted these powers, and they thought, okay, so they come together and they are now advancing, towards a multipolar world. It wasn't an idea, it was natural and now naturally taking place. So they continue to feel threatened even more, yes, the corporate powers. The economic model continues not functioning very well, and now, so you have emerging countries, Russia and China and Iran and everybody else sort of coming together, in one sort of semi-alliance or group, call it what you want, okay? The economic situation in the West is not improving. It continues to malfunction, really. And now the final blow, because after setting a trap for Russia in the Ukraine, militarily and also economically, with all the sanctions and everything, it seems that that is not working, that perhaps we will have a Russian victory after all. So that strategy has failed. So now they have two options. Since the multipolar world is kind of a fact, negotiate in terms of finding their own place in this multipolar world, and it would be an important place, certainly. Negotiate so that you can find where you're going to be in that multipolar world, or not accept that multipolar world, not accept that at all, and go for war to destroy that multipolar world, not accept it. So the two options are: you either accept it, become part of it, or you fight it all the way. And it seems that this is the option that they have taken. Now, we have to see what happens with the US elections. It seems, I'm very doubtful. I'm actually not doubtful. I'm confused about Trump. But in any case, as far as the European conflict is concerned, it seems as if he would go for the first option. He wouldn't mind negotiating, making a deal there, whatever, okay? Not so clear about the second option in the Middle East, obviously. So I'm doubtful. A little bit more about that later. So it seems that the option that they have taken was to go to war. Why are they taking us all to war? I think, first of all, panic. If you look at the headlines of newspapers, Europe threatened, Macron, so many times. Well, Macron is like Erdogan. He comes and you don't know. One day he says one thing, the other day another. But in any case, he talked for a while about the death of Europe if Russia wins. Europe could die, say other newspapers. In other words, Russia is coming for us all, kind of, against Europe. Europe threatened. These are headlines in newspapers. Scholz wants to rearm Germany to combat Russia. Blah blah blah. All of them the same. Calls for Europe for rearmament. The Polish Prime Minister acknowledged officially that Polish soldiers are in the Ukraine. Borrell says that Russia is the major existential threat to Europe. Ursula von der Leyen says that defeat in the Ukraine will mark Europe forever. Well, yeah. The European Union, I think some representative in the European Union, I didn't write down the name, represents an existential threat, Russia to the European Union. All these may seem exaggerated a little bit because it sounds as if Russia is just coming for all of us. And especially if the war was a war between two countries, why would we in England feel threatened? It just seems that, right? So from the first year of the war, we heard all this, and why? Why did you say that? It all seems so exaggerated, but really, if you think about it, it is not exaggerated. It's just that the risk is not to Europe. The risk is to those in power, the corporate interests. So obviously they're not going to say Russia is a threat to our wealth and our domination of the world. Obviously not. So in each place, it's a threat to Europe. So we Europeans react, oh my goodness, the Russians are our enemies. Well, it could be that Russia are not our enemies, but they are the enemies of this elite. Okay? So they are the ones who feel threatened. So let's see what happened here. If we go look to the origin of this, to the year 2000, okay? As I said, in the 90s, the corporate interest, this Western corporate interest, had the feeling that they had Russia under control, as I said. Yes, with Yeltsin politically and economically through the oligarchs. Yeah. In the year 2000, Putin comes into power. And some newspaper, the headline was "From a grey bureaucrat to a charismatic leader." What happened in these 24 years? What he did first was to throw the oligarchs from power. It had to be done little by little. You couldn't just take everything out, and it wouldn't have worked. So what he did steadily but surely was to dispossess them. First to say, well, okay, perhaps you can keep your money, but not the political power unless you're elected, kind of thing. Okay. But these oligarchs were very much allied with Western corporate interests. So he took it almost case by case, gradually, sometimes renationalizing this company, that company, the other company. Other times that couldn't be done or it wasn't easy, so some of these oligarchs were arrested, so he took police action. Sometimes he took judicial action. Some ended up in prison. So that was the first change that he made to actually try to break these people's power. Yeah. The second was to tried to stabilize the economy, because the economy of, my goodness, of Russia in the 1990s, those poor people, the economy was in the toilet. It really was. I mean, it went suddenly, practically from one day to the next. Okay, things were not great and the economy wasn't working. We all know that. But nevertheless, people had a guaranteed apartment, however humble, a guaranteed work job, however humble, they guaranteed this and a guaranteed that, and certainly guaranteed pensions. And all that went. So if you're in your 60s, there's so many suicides, so many, I shouldn't have said the word. The algorithm is going to start jumping now. Okay, never mind. So, yeah, a lot of misery, and all of a sudden, if you're 60, 65, and you're no longer paid your pension, I mean, you can imagine. So this colossal, collapse of everything. Okay, so that was essential that he took to do something about that, and it actually began to, get better quite quickly. Until from then on, until the year 2014, when the sanctions, okay, the economy, the annual growth was 4%, not bad, okay. So that was the second thing. Get rid of the oligarchs, stabilize the economy. Third thing, to prepare for what was to come, because he was fully expecting an attack from the West. He expected that. We got rid of the oligarchs, working closely with them, and as soon as they are able, they're coming for us. That's for sure. So what to do? Rearm, get ready with the military, stop the assault in Muslim countries, in Syria, and start putting together alliances or semi-alliances or groups or whatever, okay? China, certainly from the year 2012, when Xi came to power, it was a critical moment, because their two strategies and the way they saw the world sort of merged. And so they aligned, okay, and then the BRICS was already there. It had been there for a while, but it wasn't doing very much. But then they started, promoting this. So more countries, more emerging countries, and so on, all these forming alliances with the global south, as they're called. So in this way, you see that political alliances were created throughout the world, coming together against whom? Together against this Western corporate global finance. They had control of Western countries, emerging countries, developing countries, and now some are escaping away. Now, in 2012, with Xi coming, before that, China had been allied with the West. You remember that China and the Soviet Union, although they were both communist, they differed as to how to be the best communist. Okay, I'm just being a little bit facetious, but anyway, they were very much one against the other. Mao Zedong, I think, felt that Stalin had sold out when the Soviet Union started being just not wanting to export it as the Chinese wanted it to, but just to have socialism in their own country. Okay. Anyway, they had their disputes, okay, and of course the United States and President Nixon, you remember, took advantage of this and wanted to bring China into the West. And of course they offered them entry into what then became the World Trade Organization, and that was in the 90s. They were not going to officially enter until 2002, I believe. But what they offered the West, these corporate elites, was cheap labor and an opening to the whole of Asia, basically. And of course the corporate power said, of course, I mean, we can produce the same thing much, much more cheaply there. They all jumped and they all went and they left their own people who used to manufacture goods. They all left for China, yeah? But then China, very always looking long term, they said to themselves, okay, I know we are very good friends with the West. No problem, but careful. Because, you see, if we let them, they'll own us. And so we have to take control of how much power and influence they have in China. So they had this mission of controlling the influence and the power of Western corporations and also Chinese companies. That's a long story. Okay, so actually this was going to change their global strategy too. And this would lead to a multipolar world. Okay, if you remember that, my goodness, in the 1980s, China was like Haiti. It was at the very end of the list of, there was nothing. I mean, China's, in these last 30 years, it's like a miracle what they have been able to achieve. Whatever you think of China, this rapid growth is it's really unbelievable that they were able to do it, and so fast. So anyway, now in 2022, we see more and more companies wanting to join this alliance of the BRICS. In the summit that is coming up, I think they are about 35 or 40 more petitions to join, besides the current 10 at the moment. Okay, I think they're going to, well, experts, I don't think, because I don't have an opinion on this, because I don't know anything about it, but it seems as if the BRICS are going to develop into two groups, just to be able to sort of make it more manageable or something. I don't know what will come of that, but that many, many more countries want to join, that is a fact. So what, if you wanted to be facetious about it, you could say that they are actually, these BRICS and this multipolar world is like a revolutionary party or something against these anti-Western oligarchy finance, these global finance corporations. Certainly that is the way they see it. In Russia, what happened was that the oligarchs fled to the West. Of course, they had lots of money, and if they didn't go to jail or whatever, they were able to flee, and they became, in the West, real enemies of Russia in terms of the things that they finance, the media campaigns, and so on, in different countries. And we see the sons of these people many times in, television commentaries and YouTube channels and things, and they're Russians, very much against Russia and so on. I often wonder, is this something that you yourself, you have come to this conclusion because Russia is so bad, or is this because you are who you are, the son of who you are? I don't know. Okay. Especially many of them came to the UK. This seemed to be the more popular destination. Okay, so that is what in terms of the oligarchs. In the economic sphere, in Putin, they actually call it, in Russia, they actually, some newspapers refer to it as Putins Revolution. What did he do in the economy also? To reform or to change the banking sector. During Soviet Union times, of course, 100% of the banks were nationalized. Yeah. Were public, as they say. In the 1990s, they were privatized, okay? And I think only in a few years, only 35% of them were public, were nationalized. Putin came and began to start gradually this pro-nationalizing the banks. At the moment, I believe is 75% are public banks. This is important because you see, whoever controls the banking system, actually, the banking sector, actually controls the economy. Yeah. We see now that other countries, in the emerging countries, some other countries are doing the same. Not long ago, there was an interview with one of these oligarchs. How are the names? Unpronounceable names. Khodorkovsky. Okay, he was an oligarch. He was neutralized by Putin. He used to be the owner of the petrol company Yukos. He was expropriated, I suppose would be the word. Then he went through the judicial process. He was sentenced. He spent a few years in prison. I don't know how many, not many. But anyway, then he was allowed to flee to the West. It was a very important interview because he said explicitly there that when they all started in the 90s, all the oligarchs, okay, they were all allied. He said it like that. We were allied with Wall Street and the Rothschild family interests, Western interest, okay. He said that all of us were coordinated by Rothschild. Rothschild is very important, yeah, but especially in France and in the UK, extremely important. And the problem here is that they were threatening their people, Russia was threatening their people and sending them to jail. So Russia has to be punished for this. Because if it is not, what if, people in the West also start thinking that this is a possibility in the West? Start thinking along these lines that these people can be prosecuted. Even though one could argue that these interests have been destroying the West for the last 30 years. So obviously this country, beginning with R, has to be defeated in some way. We cannot have it here, always sort of in the middle, It's like a spanner in the works. I mean, it just go away. We have to do away with it, okay, somehow. regime change or something, by whatever means. Okay, so we said that at the beginning that these corporate interests had two options: either to accept a new place in the world within a multipolar world, or not to accept to be part of anything, but to continue to be the only ones, and so you have to go to war against these other powers that pretend that they can have power. Yeah. So it is not Europe that is experiencing an existential threat. It is this corporate global finance thing. All right. So in these 30 years of this strategy that they have been working towards, they had identified that this particular country could be a problem, and they were right. After the Ukrainian trap there, what they were thinking was, okay, we'll defeat them, we'll change the regime, and if we can succeed in Russia, then we can move on to the rest of the world. Because it is Russia that empowers the emerging world to say, oh, well, perhaps we can go in this different direction. With Russia subdued, they have no other way to go. So it is essential that Russia is defeated in some way or another. You understand? So after 30 years of having noticed that this country is a problem to our dominance, what we seem to have at the moment is the opposite. The sanctions didn't work, and they seem to be winning. So in that context, you see, the victory is unacceptable. Russia's victory has to be unacceptable. Yeah? Because that victory will mean the failure of 30 years of strategy. And not only that, its influence in the rest of the world, in other countries, and even in Europe. It could take hold, this belief that the ordinary people could rise up against these multi-billionaires. Russia could do it, the other country. What is stopping us? Well, this is not impossible, because you see that in all of Europe at the moment, all the alternative movements and new political parties and movements and so on, they some are against wars, some are against this or that, okay? All of them, if they challenge the present system, all these movements are called pro-Russian. Whether they are from the right, the left, the center, they are all called. That is the reference. And it's probably because of that, because they are in some sort of way challenging more than they actually think they are. Just the mere fact that they could be questioning how power is exercised in the West, that is just by itself a mere threat. Okay, so that victory of Russia over the Ukraine means definitely a multipolar world. That is what is going to definitely come after that, an acceptance of that, definitely. That means losing control of the world, of the whole world. in the long term, but in the short term also losing control of Europe and even the US. You know, to that anti-corporate stand by ordinary people. You know, you only need, you know, it's brewing there. You only need a few leaders, and it could become serious if that tendency, if those people's feelings are organized, led, directed, and that could become a problem. So this victory, which is an existential, it is an existential defeat, but not for Europe. It is for these corporate elites. So it has to be avoided at all costs. Don't know how, but the only thing we can think of is a global conflict. And a global conflict necessarily means nuclear war, because if the conflict is between nuclear powers, something could happen, and it certainly could develop into that. Because countries have nuclear arms for what exactly? Well, perhaps to use them when they feel threatened, when they feel really threatened, between a rock and a hard place. Something could happen there. Sooner or later, something could change in a few minutes. Yeah. It seems that they have opted for this last strategy of not willing to be part of a multipolar world and to go to war instead in order to prevent it. And they are quite advanced in this way. Okay, so had to take a little break there. But okay, so they are advancing towards this global conflict, and by means of what? By means of specific measures, threats, and actions. Let's take each one. In regard to the measures taken, well, in military terms, many of the measures taken are in fact a cause for war, but it doesn't really matter. They have been doing things in this escalation business. They have been doing things, and they keep doing them, and they keep doing them, and they keep on. All the while, nevertheless, they acknowledge that, well, we enter into a dance here, okay? First of all, they say, oh no, we can't do that, okay? That would mean that we would be actively at war, so openly so no, we can't do that. But then they do it. We can't do that because, Russia is the first nuclear power in the world. We would be openly at war with a nuclear power. No, we can't do that. No, we can't do that, but then they move public opinion a little bit. They work through the media. They move public opinion, and people get used to it a little bit, and then lo and behold, 2 months later, they're doing that. Missiles, oh no. Shall we give or send missiles to Ukraine? No, we can't. I mean, 2 months later, there they are. They do it. Sometimes they're already there when they start preparing public opinion. Oh, perhaps we should do this. They're already there. Anyway, in 2 months' time, you can count them. They are there. The tanks, the Leopard tanks, Leopard, sorry, Leopard tanks. No, we couldn't possibly send Leopard tanks to Russia. The Germans were saying, my goodness, no, I mean, German tanks, fighting Russia, no, that would be like, World War II, no, blah, blah, blah. 2 months later, there they are. Okay, so we all know, don't we, that it is not Ukraine that is launching missiles. Some suggested that, well, perhaps it is the Ukrainian who actually pushes the button. Well, Russia, from the very beginning, really, if you think about it, could have said something like, oh, NATO, you are involved in this, we know you are. We know that you are the ones who operate these systems. So if you attack us, we'll attack you. They could have said that from the very beginning. In other words, not just the Ukraine, but London and New York. But it doesn't do it. Why? Well, perhaps it feels that it's not in its interest, in her interest. Why? Well, it's winning the war, it's a slow war, a war directed towards not so much territory, but to waste the enemies, to exhaust the enemies, an exhaustion war, and to exhaust the enemy's power in every front. And it feels that it's not in its interest to change that situation. So NATO says, well, okay, if we are losing, we have to escalate to a more direct confrontation and try to have Russia to react so that, we can have that direct global war. That is the aim. And to a large extent, Russia has been taking it, putting up with it, because she might feel that it's not in her interest. It is acting very coldly, very measuredly. In a way, you could say that Iran is doing the same. The strategies are very similar. So now we see that practically all European countries are talking about compulsory military service. In many countries already by 2027. I think it's Denmark or Sweden or Norway. Women in the military too. Compulsory. But you see, they have to know that a global war may lead to a nuclear war. For example, in May, there were 3 attacks to the Russian nuclear, the radar, the nuclear alert system. These attacks would not have much meaning if the war was only a war with another country, with the Ukraine. And in all countries, an attack to this nuclear radar alarm system means open war. Well, you could say, well, it wasn't the West, it wasn't NATO, it was a sort of a mad Ukrainian who just pushed the button and say, I'm going to do this. But if that was the case, you see, the West or NATO would have reacted. What are you doing? The United States would send the Marines or something, to change the government or depose the government or the regime or something. What do you think you're doing? This is going to lead us to a nuclear war. But that is not what has happened. There wasn't even a critique, okay? Not even a critic appeared. 2 weeks later, there was another attack of this kind. And a few weeks later, a third. There's only one explanation here as to who is doing this. And now we're talking about long-distance missiles. So we start the dance again, oh, do we authorize Ukraine to have these long-distance missiles? And then you have the president going to the United States. Oh, no, perhaps that's going too far. Well, Starmer said, we want the U.S. to approve of these long-distance missiles against Russia and so on. No, said the U.S., no, we can't do that. Oh, dear. Okay, what do you think will the result be here? What will happen eventually? Now, I just want to point out that I think that what is happening with Israel in the Middle East is kind of the same strategy. A regional war, a world war between these two countries, Israel and Iran. At first there was a difficulty sort of totally controlling Gaza, the attacks in Gaza, then the West Bank, then it was Lebanon, Hezbollah. Then suddenly there was an attack against Iran's consulate, you remember, in Syria, provoking the escalation. Iran responded in some sort of measured way, just to keep face, I suppose. But both in Russia and Iran, it is not they see in their interest to respond. Why? Because it is they, the others, that want the escalation. So if they are the ones who want the escalation, I don't want to respond to that. The problem is that if you don't respond, you know what's happened, that the next one there will be another provocation, and that provocation will be on a bigger scale. And Israel's strategy, then we had the murder of that gentleman. Again, the names escape me. In Tehran, yeah. They didn't respond. Iran, they haven't responded yet. I think they don't want to, in the sense that when you respond to a provocation by your enemy, what you're doing, really, if you think about it, is falling into that trap that they're setting out for you. In other words, you are doing them a favor when you respond to what they want, which is for you to respond. And now we have Lebanon. Will it blow up the whole thing? The question is, you see, if this wasn't the same strategy used in Europe, ask yourself, would it be in Israel's interest to be at war with all its neighbors? It kind of, for the long-term security and, of future of all those countries involved, it makes no military sense. It makes no military sense if you were having problems in Gaza to go out and start other wars with other enemies. So it only makes sense to me, if I understand it in this way, that they want to really burst up for the situation to blow up. Why? To get the US involved, actively, openly so. Which is really the same that NATO is trying to do in the Ukraine. NATO's countries by themselves don't have the capacity to go against Russia. So the strategy is to get the US to be there directly. Just as Israel doesn't have the capacity just by itself, without the United States, to go by itself against all these countries. So the interest is for the US to come directly there. To save the USA, it's not really, as I said at the beginning, it's not really the United States as a country. It's in order to serve this war the interest of global financial interest, using the US people, to solve the situation. So we come back to a world war. A direct confrontation between the US and Iran, that's a world war, because you can see that China and Russia are going to not allow it. In other words, they're going to come to their defense. Already you have a global war there. In both cases, there are two ways of getting at it, to a world war. The US directly, to ensure that it is to get the US, and the other strategy is also to ensure, with all these escalations, that it is the other country that's to blame. In other words, the provocation is in order for them to act. As they respond, then public opinion will say they did it. We no, not me, no Alamo here. We are the victims here. So please provoke me, respond to my provocation. I'll justify it before my public opinion. So the provocations, as I see, are going to continue. There will be more and more provocations until that moment when, if we don't know, Russia and Iran will fall into this, responding to them. They haven't done so yet. It is, I don't know. It's, the window is very small here. Okay, Russia has just changed its nuclear doctrine, as you know, lowering the how they can actually employ nuclear weapons. So these are decisive months now. It's as if we have two clocks in one clock in two directions. Before Russia definitely wins that battle, or the US elections. These two major points, the US elections, as I said, November 5th, January 20th, or that's it, the war in Europe is over, definitely. The escalations continue. For example, the latest one in Kursk. Yeah, it was really a military disaster, an operational disaster. But never mind. It was one more step forward in NATO's case. It doesn't make sense militarily for just if it's just Russia, Ukraine. But it does from NATO's point of view. In other words, now we have invaded Russia. We've taken another step. It's, we have jumped another hurdle here. And now we have the long-distance missiles. Okay, until when? We don't know. So we are in a very, very dangerous situation at the moment. We are at high risk. It seems that Wall Street seeks that risk, that conflict, that global conflict. Russia and Iran managed up to now to sort of keep themselves cool, not to fall into the trap, but we don't know how long this can be like that. So what is to be done? Well, one of those clocks, which is the US election, if what happens if Trump wins. I have my doubts about Trump, to tell you the truth, okay? As far as Ukraine is concerned, he says that, yes, you know, he will make a deal, he wants that war stopped, will negotiate, do something. Initially, when he first ran for office, he said, yeah, you know, the United States has to stop being the world's policeman and so on. Policeman, I don't know whether they call it policeman, because a policeman is one that keeps order, not one that goes around creating chaos. But anyway, that is what they call themselves. So, but the thing is that the emerging countries actually are hoping that there might be, if he gets elected, and that is a big if, that actually things will change, that things might change. It could be that Russia coolly prefers to wait rather than to respond. In other words, why go all the way out to respond now to this provocation when perhaps in 2 months I might have not needed to do so? But the thing is that with Trump, I have my doubts, because, you know, with Ukraine he's on this side, but with in the Middle East he's on the other side. So, and it is the same thing. So I don't quite understand why the corporate powers, obviously there is something I don't understand. There is something missing here, because I don't understand why they feel so threatened by this man. When he was in office, I think his intentions were good and so on. There are different explanations. He couldn't do very much. He was betrayed, this and that. Everyone has an opinion. Now it seems that he knows the situation better. He knows that he has to get people who agree with him, all that. He's learned that lesson. But nevertheless, I doubt that he's seeing all this in that global thing that I have been discussing. Because even if you're not on this side, it's not that he's not on the side, it's just that he thinks, you know, it should stop. Perhaps for very good reasons. You know, it has already been decided for a long time, so why continue? You know, from a businessman point of view, it makes no sense. But strategically, geopolitically, by being in the Middle East where he is, I don't think he's going to change very much there. So here we are. I don't know. I end this with, I don't know how, been talking for an hour and 15 minutes. So I'm going to leave it there. I don't know what's going to happen after all this. But in these months between now and, you know, the next 2 or 3 months, we are, I think, in an emergency situation. We really are. Anyway, I leave it there. Thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, the bell thing and everything. Okay? Thank you so much. Bye-bye.